All right. Thank you all for coming bright and early Thursday morning after the event. I know this is kind of a low point in the energy, a dip in the conference energy. But excited to have you all here for a Affinity breakfast on embedded Git. Might have caught my presentation yesterday, which was a more structured, introduction to embedded Git and a list of updates. You may have noticed my voice was pretty bad yesterday. It's worse today, but I think I'm able to talk to you all. Yeah, so what I want to do today is I have a very loosely structured presentation, just talking through what we're thinking about with embedded Gits, what we're trying to do along various themes. And then I would love for this to be very conversational. I know a bunch of people have questions about how to set up Git and source control in their solutions. Hopefully we can have some Q&A that is a little more time than the 2 minutes I left in the presentation yesterday. All right. Just gonna advance slide. PowerPoint. There we go. All right. So what is the motivation when we're building embedded Git? So there's kind of two different ways you can go with creating source control for people to use with InterSystems IRIS customers, users. There are some tools that a lot of our people building on IRIS use that provide a fully integrated workflow for development and source control deployment. CCR is one example that our team produces for people. I know a lot of people have had good experiences with Deltangi as well from George James. As I understand it, it's kind of like a full workflow on top of a custom source control solution. Another way we can go about it is provide little small modular building blocks that you can use to build your own source control DevOps pipeline. And that can support a bunch of different workflows. So one of those building blocks, as I see it, is embedded Git, which is kind of a layer that connects your IRIS instance with a Git repository. And that kind of speaks Git. So you can use any tool that speaks Git as well. So GitHub, GitLab, a bunch of people create deployment pipelines that are based off of Git repositories. Another building block here is IPM, I think, which is a way to package up and deploy IRIS-based solutions. Used a lot internally, used by a lot of our users. And the interesting thing about creating this modular building block is that it can be used by a bunch of different people. And we're an open source project, so we have a wide variety of stakeholders, which is something that is interesting to me. There's app services, this team within InterSystems that I introduced yesterday that you might have heard about more from other of our presentations, is the team that is responsible for maintaining this source control, Git source control project. There's people using it across different use cases. For example, healthcare interoperability development teams where maybe they're not using source control at all and they want to start, so they're building out some solution using embedded Git. There's people developing systems just on the data platform on IRIS. In a similar case, there's some interoperability teams that are hosted on the clouds or managed services, things like that, which is they have a more specific on-ramp into InterSystems products. They less control in some ways, more control in others. And there are ISC people who talk to me about, ISC is InterSystems, talk to me about embedded Git, because we're very interested in having a good story about how to use source control for their products. We are invested in source control because it makes your solutions more stable, provides all of these benefits of source control that you've probably heard me talk about. So another thought I've been having about embedded Git is, well, in my presentation yesterday, I talked about the difference between a shared development environment and a local development environment. How we tend to push people towards local development because it provides like a bunch of benefits in terms of the developer experience, in terms of using source control, Git features like branching. But kind of an interesting thing about this is that in a shared development environment, embedded source control, like Git source control, is kind of a total necessity. If you're going to have source control at all and not be the Wild West on a shared development environment, you need some sort of embedded source control, whether that's Git, CCR, Delta-G, etc. There's a big etc. there. If you have a local development environment, then embedded source control is more of a convenience. So there's a thing where originally I framed this as like levels of maturity as you're like growing up your development team experience. You're going from one to the other. But there's this kind of ironic way in which the more mature you are, the less you need our solution. It's kind of awkward to talk about. So part of my questions about the shared dev workflow is that the way I framed it yesterday, if you're doing shared development, then Git acts just as a history log. Having branching is impossible. All of your commits are directly to main, and it's kind of, you have to have some other solution for integrating changes forwards, deploying them forwards. Often in interoperability, that solution is manual deployments using the deployment manager, which lets you pick specific items, classes, etc., that you're ready to deploy to a further environment. You'll export those and import them onto a production or testing environment. And that works great, but it's kind of deployment separate from source control. It's manual. I'm very curious if anybody is using like a different way to deploy changes that is actually aware of Git as a repository, using cherry picking to cherry pick specific commits that go forward to another branch. That's something where I'm like, in theory, that should be possible. If I read about it online, some people are like, nah, don't do that. Other people are like, oh, that's totally fine. It should work. So I don't know. So another part of this editing, the source control experience is editing. I talked yesterday about like, there's server-side source control. There's also client-side source control. And these map onto different ways of editing code in InterSystems. Like I say we're unique, but we're not really unique in that a lot of our code is items in the database. Often people don't even think of it as code. It's just like, oh, this is a DTL I'm building. This is a BPL. And I think that's really, that's common in the data space. If you think about SQL development, a lot of what you're doing as a SQL developer is running DDL statements to create tables, writing scripts that do all of these things. But the table itself is an entity in the database itself. So having all of these items in the database means that server-side editing is a possibility. In the past, it was the only possibility. With Studio, it worked great. Now we have VS Code's client-side editing is much more common, but there's still kind of an impedance mismatch between editing things on the client side, editing things in the database through our low-code editors in the system management portal, and making sure your Git or source control repository is reconciled with that. And a third thing here that complicates things, I was going to make a diagram with 3 boxes, but now in the past 6 months, coding agents, AI, LLMs have gotten a lot more usable, and they're probably going to continue to be a big part of development workflows. And this could work out in either model, right? Like our agentic coding stuff like Claude Code or Codex is definitely going to be working on files in a file system somewhere. So that fits more naturally with client-side editing. But there's also things like GitHub Copilot, which work fine with the server-side editing in VS Code, and people are using it successfully. And there's also the possibility that coding agents will be embedded directly into like the data solution at some point, where they'll be running like alongside Iris and creating items. And if that's the case, it kind of makes sense for them to be editing things directly in the database to some extent. So I don't know, maybe increasing use of coding agents will like throw a wrench in the work of my priorities with embedded Git, but I'm not going to make any predictions. I don't talk about the future in general. And then deployment. I'm curious about how people deploy their changes because there are so many options, and maybe there should be like a single recommended pathway. Like in my presentation yesterday, I decided to say, oh, primary pathway recommended is use IPM, the InterSystems Package Manager. It makes it really easy to package up your solution and deploy it into a different environment. I think coming up, if you caught like the IPM presentation before, there was talk about database packaging, which allows you to use IPM to package up a solution just as like an IRIS type batch, like an actual database file. And deploying is just copying, installing that database, and then switching over to using that database. In some ways, that's a lot nicer than like compiling things from source to deploy to an environment. It feels like a more standard software development practice. But there are all these options. There's manual deployment. The deployment manager is great. A lot of people are probably still like just copying files over and manually loading them and compiling them. There's the deployment features inside of embedded Git, where your IRIS instance is kind of aware of changes in the Git repository, and those changes are incrementally compiled. And then a lot of people have really successful like custom scripting, where they just like load things in from the Git repository themselves. And I wanted to talk about embedded Git as a community phenomenon. I feel like we've been really successful in having these biweekly user group meetings where people can show up, bring their problems, their questions. I've really enjoyed people who are not me sharing their expertise, because I mean, yeah, app services, we're not like the same as a lot of our customers. We are creating solutions full stack on IRIS, but we're not really healthcare interoperability developers. And we're not even like primarily interop developers. It's becoming more and more part of their applications internally. But I mean, I've been on the team for like 10 years, and for most of that time, it's mostly been pure object script IRIS solutions. So yeah, having these user group meetings is great. What was I trying to get at here? Ad hoc nature of communication and prioritization. Basically, if you show up to these meetings, you get to be in the room where you get to nudge me to develop things. It's kind of like maybe I should be more formal in how I'm planning out goals and milestones. But instead, it's like, oh, people are talking about this thing. I should really fix it, add a new feature, etc. And I want to recognize community contributions. Over the past year, we've gotten people who are not app services making pull requests and making contributions to the code base. And that's fantastic. I mean, this is an open source project. It's a wide variety of stakeholders. It's modular. For all the reasons I mentioned in previous slides, I think it's great to have community contributions to it. Yeah. Okay, that was all I had. That was very loose. That was a lot of like questions and wonderings and not a lot of answers. I thought that was like yesterday's presentation was like, here's everything streamlined as like telling you what to do or what you can't do. And today would be more like, oh, I'm in a room with you. I can talk with you for an hour so I can get your thoughts. Yeah, thank you for joining.
Can I just say, well, how many people attended the feature presentation yesterday?
About, okay. Yeah. So whether it's about those thoughts I had in that presentation, or even just basic embedded Git questions from what is the point of this to niche, like very specific, I'm using this, it's giving me an error message I don't know about. I want to hear from you. Anything I can.
Yeah, I have. My name is Anil. So one of the biggest challenge or feature which we would like to see is an ability to run free or post deployments.
Hmm.
That's the one where I think at this point in time, how exactly do things get or the you're doing object script deployment before you're doing deployment. Stop the production and then deploy the other part of it. Do XYZ. Get conversions. So how do we achieve something?
Yeah, thanks, Anil. So repeating the question for the stream and recording stuff, the question was about how to run scripts pre and post deployment. The example is being like, there's a data migration that needs to happen, or like if you're changing something into production, you may need to stop and start the production. Yeah, any number of things. So this really goes back to the fact that there's multiple different ways to deploy changes. If you are using embedded Gits to deploy, to pull changes and compile them incrementally, there's a concept called a pull event handler. This is something that will like run when a Git operation happens that changes things on the repository. So that's basically your entry point to customize any sort of deployment behavior. There's an interface, like a class that you can implement, you can override and implement, that lets you define custom scripts that run before and after any sort of deployment, and a way to configure your custom class so it runs them.
Is that able to see the contents of the pull request, like what actually changed?
Yes, it has a list of modified items associated with that change. So like, and including whether things were modified, added, deleted. And you can get that from the object itself that you're overriding. Part of the thing here is that there's scripts that you might need to run per change, like only once, like you're doing a specific change that requires a data migration. How do you hook into it such that just when I'm deploying this change or this version, I'm running that script, and maybe other changes don't care about that. And that's not something we currently support. That's something good. I mean, the pull event handler is customizable, so you can run any sort of object script inside of it. Would you find?
There's a generic solution that I've seen people use for that, which is that as part of what you deploy class in a package dedicated to upgrades. And that class contains object generator methods that cause either that or have a projection. And that means that when someone is building a package, they build a dedicated deploy item, and it's the change that you're shipping. When it lands at the destination system, it does its magic. And as long as you write it so that it causes trouble that events more points, you extract or change things small. Along those lines, also look for anything so we would I think we can look for it in what's routine. But we actually have
Yeah, just summarizing that for the recording. A couple of suggestions from John and Ben. One, to have an update script or a deployment script that's inside of a class in object generator code, so it runs when you're compiled. or in a class projection, so it runs when it's compiled, or having like a framework for run once scripts like that are associated with a specific change, and customizing the pull event handler to run that script. Yeah, and as John mentioned, gets a lot easier if your update scripts are item potent. Is that the word? If you run them multiple times, they'll like not break things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea is having the control within the script that if you want to run it once or every time that. So if I have a change in a class which is associated with production, every time I'm deploying it, I want to say either disable that component, deploy the class, then start the stop the production, deploy and start production. And that should happen every time that class is deployed, because that's the direct component of production. Do not take the effective changes through finding that component is deployed. Whereas if I'm doing more data conversion, I want to do it once. So the script which is running as a pre or post deployment, if that controls by itself, like you want to run it not just as once, or you want to run it every time of deployment, the script has a control, then it's better that way rather than having like.
Yeah. So that first example is a good one. If you're deploying changes to a class that is used in a production, you need to restart an item. And that we should absolutely just have built into embedded Git. We can recognize if something is associated with a production item and restart that associated item. I think there is a enhancement on the roadmap. I mean, this is supported in CCR, so I kind of need to merge that stuff into embedded Git. And it's good to hear that it's something that's relevant to you, because it makes me prioritize that.
Just out of curiosity, how many people here are working with So keep your hand up if you are aware of production decomposition. Okay, keep your hand up if you're using production decomposition. Okay, excellent. So it might be worth, especially for the people that weren't here yesterday, just to give a 40,000-foot view on that, just because of how impactful that is for production developers, especially the larger teams.
Yeah. So production decomposition is a feature we're proud of. We spent some time on, and yeah, I kind of want to do an infomercial style advertisement for it. It's like, has this happened to you? You have either a shared development environment with a giant production where one user starts editing the production, somebody else needs to edit the same production because there are a bunch of different interfaces in this production, and they're locked out because the production is just one file. And even in not a shared environment, but an individual environment, you can end up with constant merge conflicts if different people are adding items to that production, because those items they just go in the bottom of that XML, that big X data block of all of the items. So every time anybody adds an item and somebody else does, you'll end up with a merge conflict. Production decomposition is a way to resolve both of those issues by changing the representation of the production. Instead of just being one giant file, we decompose it into a bunch of little files, one for each of the items in the production. So instead of one file with 1,000 items in an X data block, you'll have 1,000 files, one for each of the items in the production. So that helps avoid merge conflicts. It makes the editing experience easier. And our editing is even smart enough to make the lock be item specific rather than production specific. So if I'm changing one item in an interface and Dominic goes in and tries to edit another item in the production, he'll be able to just do that. But the lock still applies to the item specifically, because that's still necessary. So if he tries to edit the same item that I have checked out, he'll get a warning saying that Pravin has it checked out. So that gets you the nice behavior of locking that you need from a shared environment, but at a more granular level. It's a huge improvement in the developer experience for interoperability, for CCR our other solution, we've rolled it out for all of our internal applications, and it's been working great. And I think for a lot of customers as well.
You just want to highlight Delcon used that for what, 8 years? Something like that?
Yeah, I know, presentation, but it's the sincerest form of flattery.
Absolutely. That's why I wanted to give credit where credit is due.
Yes.
Can I, in relation to that, can I ask, have you got production decomposition support built into the new portal, the new config
UI.
because until now, and maybe it's still the case in the new UI, we have to jump through hoops to achieve that locking of certain items and unlocking of the other items.
It is not in the portal. We have commitment from development and product management that they will work with us to get hooks, appropriate hooks established. But it's not there. So we actually have to revert back to a full production launch. If somebody's using UI, we do not use production decomposition, so users are still using the old UI for that.
We're ahead of you on that.
You are ahead of us on that. Well, we did put the effort in because we do have the commitment. But if we want to start creating it. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
It would be product managers today. If you haven't already, we'll link arms and get them across that one.
Yeah. Important clarification that I should repeat for the recording is the full nice production decomposition experience is not yet supported in the new production like editor UIs, but we have commitment internally that it will get there.
I went to one of the sessions the source control support in more of the I was a bit surprised to hear that not granular level. It seemed, I haven't looked into it. I'm not an end user building productions. It seemed to me like the risk was that they would make the same mistakes between whole production and between plants, which schedules. Yeah. When you create a schedule, the source control teams CSI source control to work with the schedule. If it's will export, will give you the information about the entire schedule rather than a particular item that you're conceptually use as editing or appears to me from outside actually editing one bit of the schedule.
Great.
But it seems like the way it's projected out to the server-side source control class is as an entire, all the items in the schedule. So two developers working on two different bits of the schedule are going to stamp on each other with the promotions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where's the communication or lack of it between the guys who build it and the guys who use it?
Yeah.
Very good point.
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's new items in the interoperability portal, just reiterating, that have never been wired for source control hooks in the past. And they now are on the newer versions, like schedule specs. They're using this STD document type. But John is saying they can run into the same issue that we've had to resolve with production decomposition, where the granularity is such that it's all or nothing for a specific schedule spec. It's one document, and the locking is such that only one person can edit it at a time. So I think that's less a lack of communication and more of a lack of we haven't thought about it to impress on it. There's also kind of this spectrum where everything can be decomposed into smaller parts. So how do we find the tipping point? So for example, with production decomposition, like once that blocker is removed, and it's a big one, the kind of next one is routing rules. Like there's a big routing rule that routes messages to different like items in the production. I might be using the wrong terminology because I'm not a interop developer, but that's also, each rule is just its own document. So do we go into rule decomposition and break it down into things? I was thinking about like, you could decompose a class into individual methods and parameters into these pieces, but that seems definitely too far.
I think the difference that with rules is, as implementers, you can decide we won't do it all in one big rule. We'll do it in a front rule that then splits off and says, I want to know about these things. They're logically drawn together, we'll pass it on somewhere else. The entities where they implement choice.
Right.
And that's when you guys need to make it's the architectural decisions.
Yeah.
The way I see it, it's like a gray line. Is it really cool? Source control is meant for not for operation feeding. Actual feeds and memory services like today. But the production can often be very big. It's just that's the thing we understand. If it's not going to be transparent, that's what we want to try. That's what we're pushing for. Saving ourselves. Reference tables within an application. Source control. And it's actually part of the new. It wasn't a presentation this week, but the HealthShare product is continuing to push forward with change control hooks on registries and on configuration pages and on whatnot. And there's some very exciting things happening because historically those have been massive pain points for implementation because of the lack of control means increased risk and slower velocity. Okay. Yeah. So we are pushing for all of it. In fact, the new things that we're talking about in the UI portal came from a deep dive that we drove internally. Like we gotta get on the ball here. We need to provide books in all places that we need. So we just didn't think enough about the question schedule. Pravin's point is a good one, right? There are different levels of decomp. And I guess maybe part of it has to do with how often the schedules change, right? In terms of level of person, I think they're like doing a table as part of the post.
Just gonna take a page out of Ben's book. How many people here are working on HealthShare as a product, or like building HealthShare solutions? A couple. Without any promises, but just because I see that we've done a lot of work in CCR and producing great like HealthShare change control for this configuration stuff. Is there appetite for this? Is there a strong need for this within embedded Git?
I've not really seen the demos or look into CCR. I've read the description and more talk about track here side of the things, less on the HealthShare side, so I didn't.
Okay.
We can talk after CCR is fully supported for HealthShare. It really just depends. Like it's a bit of falls for anything that we post. But I think Pravin's question is more along the lines of: is there an appetite for embedded Git to support the HealthShare change control hooks that were just released? So that because it's a separate change control class that sits at the application level, as opposed to the basically the code level, which we do right now with emission. Was that one of your questions?
Yep, that's exactly what it's trying to say.
Same gray area.
Right.
Yeah, certainly there are things that are configuration and not code, but the ability to version them and say, yes, when they broke, we changed it, is, even if it doesn't have to deploy from one environment to the next, it's still kind of nice to be able to say, I went on holiday, came back, and my test environment's not working. That shared QA environment's not working. Who made a change? And it could be somebody changed a system default setting, which is by definition QA environment specific.
Yeah.
Somebody changed it. Nobody owns up. It can take days to get the thing working.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, one of the complication also comes in that information. So, in past, in one of the source code custom implementation, one of the things what we were doing is for the production items, it's not only one component which decides what the behavior should be. For a single interface, it's the one business service, then maybe one or two or more business processes in operation, but they combine together to define a definition of an interface, and then somehow that can become more complex where you have two business services in the same business process and all that. Like how do you package and align all that thing together? We were looking is we were creating our own custom script and managing that. And when we decompose all of these things like individual items, at that point in time, someone will still need to make sure when you're deploying the whole thing, the silver.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, with Delta Energy, we're really fortunate that its heritage means that right from the get-go, the concept of what you're managing, which we call the object, is distinct from the code entity, the artifact, which we call the component. And an object can contain, or a version of an object can contain 0 or more components. Most times, most objects are single component objects. But if you want an object that consists of the service, the pre-processing, and the file operations, you can register it that way. And then in terms of reservation, if somebody wants to reserve just one of those processes, Delta Energy says, okay, that belongs to this object. I'm going to reserve for you all of the member components of the object. And when you deploy, even if you think you're just deploying that process, Delta Energy knows that up front is aggregated those. It's also integrated itself with Visual Basic and dealing with files, some of which are two files, an FRM file and an FRX file. And it's a disaster for your application if you make a change and just move the FRM file and leave the FRX file behind. So the ability to say this particular form entity actually comprises two files, transfer those, never let them get out of step with one.
Yeah, we're getting into some very hairy topics around healthcare interoperability, health share. And this is a really interesting discussion around deployment. I don't want to give the impression that source control or introducing source control is very intimidating and difficult to do. I wanted to mention some of you might have been at Nick's Tech Exchange demo yesterday, where he demoed a full containerized workflow for development on an IRIS application using embedded Gits.
I wasn't recorded because it was just like a thing conversation, but I didn't get in trouble. And of course, so setting up.
Or if you can that here for the rest of
Yeah, so I just wanted to plug that. Yeah, we don't have the recording, but that's up on GitHub. It's on my personal ISCP Barton GitHub page. We should merge your change at some point. We'll talk talk about that tomorrow while I'm on the train. Yeah.
Could you show us the link that you was talking about so we maybe take notes?
Yes, absolutely. I have to figure out how to share different things here. Okay, I'm gonna just stop this presentation and is it gonna duplicate? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, okay. It's just give your baby some more some lots.
Yeah. Shall I do it live? Just merge your branch? I'm gonna do it.
Oh.
I reviewed all this. I was in the room when a lot of it was written.
So more context for folks who were able to make it to the presentation yesterday. This is kind of historically the reason why this is in these space. This was originally operating kind of services like full stack application, all those full stack applications back in. And the current versions it's a full stack application box. It's a toy. Voice really isn't this thing's some structure so the orchestration. So you can see new or sort of inspiration.
Yeah. This is a full containerized development workflow using embedded Git with interoperability. This is like local development. Let's see, how long is it going to take to build? Yeah. Yeah, most of this is cached. It should be pretty quick. So theoretically, onboarding a new developer into developing your interoperability production ensemble, as the old heads would call it, like myself. Oh, is it failing? Yeah. I won't go into live debugging this. But onboarding a new developer should be as easy as just having them clone the repo, install Docker Desktop, Docker Compose build, Docker Compose up, and they have a full working copy. They can make edits. They can use the interoperability editors, and embedded Git will automatically export stuff to the Git repository. Yeah. There's no way to zoom the URL bar, I guess, but I see pre-parted summit sample Git. Oh, good suggestions. Yeah, I'll do that and leave it up on the screen. That's probably not important credentials. How do I get rid of these? How do I zoom in here? View. There we go. I'll just leave that up.
There.
View.
Play with that on the right home.
Yeah.
More build sheets. Good for you. But that was the first time I saw that. So,
Yeah. It was working yesterday. It's probably something about my environment that I changed recently. Oh. Yeah. Any thoughts or comments, topics people want to bring up? This is kind of how our user group meetings are, by the way. Yeah, go ahead.
User very virtual. Is there an application available publicly?
Yes. These are virtual, they're online every other Wednesday morning Eastern time because we're in Boston. During the presentation, I said to ask your sales representative to ask me to add you, but you can also just email me directly. It's my email. I'll add you to the invitation.
People should also be aware that there is a channel. You can also start a thread there for people that like your But you should go to that channel and use the follow button to make sure you get notifications. So your releases, updates, Q&A, you can help each other out there. And, it's a great way to stay plugged in with others. There's also a channel for IPM as well.
You show us how to follow. I want to follow the community. I want to.
Yeah, that's why IPM is funny. Leave the full thing. Yeah. So you just do a search for Git. It'll show up as the tag at the top here.
Okay.
And then there's a follow button which Pravin isn't following.
Oh, no. Okay, that's because back in my day, there was just Git and source control tags. Now there is a fancy new embedded, so it's still a failure. Well, I'm not following that either.
So he sees everything.
Yeah, and I read them all too. I guess I can put this link in our note.
Remember that asking questions and answering questions in the community for Medicare once you global master's points, so you can get InterSystems stocks. Keep that in mind.
There is a limit on the songs how many you can get.
No limit. You know, you could get 50,000 points worth of stocks if you want to. And I have it from an inside source that they're designing a dark mode pair of socks. So yeah, so if the bright teal isn't your style, then just wait. Dark mode.
I'll chip in here and say that the giveaway is socks. So
Get some points, James socks.
we will insist on scanning your badge and giving you some information about our solution.
Which one is that?
John Shane's software.
Oh, wait.
It's strictly one pair per person. That's very
So yeah, if you're not a member of Global Masters, it is definitely worth checking that out because all of your interactions on the development community automatically.
There are the socks.
There are
Coding
socks,
socks.
coding socks. I was wearing a pair yesterday. Did you just go add some socks?
Yeah, I just got some new socks. I do love how many of the meetings I've had here develop into sock talk. Everybody loves a sock.
Did you have some of the ecosystem too? If you have to spun the wheel again, another quiz, you can get some socks or charging cable, or whatever, make sure to stop by and say hi.
All right, I think we're pretty much at time. Please do reach out if you want to be added to the user group. Those are great. And thank you all for coming. I'll see you around the conference. Oh.
In general, always just
We usually start with just a few minutes of me giving updates of new changes since last week. And then it's totally an open forum. People bring their own agendas, items. So you don't need to clear things with me just to get on the agenda. You just need to speak up. Thank you, Anil, and thank you, everybody.
yes.